Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about probably a topic that means the most to me. It's probably one of my most important videos. A lot of you know that I was writing a book about an hourglass, talking about resilience. I don't know if I'll ever get around to writing that book, but I just kind of wanted to give everyone an overview of the hourglass analogy, and hopefully it can benefit you in some ways. My goal with this book was to get people starting to talk about resilience and talk about their difficult moments in life with the people that they love, and for there to be a common language and a common space to talk about those difficult experiences. So this hourglass analogy, I can't emphasize this enough. It is by far the one thing that has helped me to walk this path. And that's why I wanted to share it with you today. So yeah, the hourglass analogy, I forgot to say this at the beginning, but the hourglass analogy comes from an actual hourglass. So I've got one here that I'm gonna go get right now, and hopefully I can show you what I'm talking about. So here's an hourglass that I got from my awesome coworkers in the church office building. Shout out to Jesse, Scott, and Jason. But yeah, the hourglass analogy basically comes from watching an hourglass. So, oh, it's hard to see with this glare, which is very unfortunate. Here, this is yeah. Okay, so well, I'll have to find a different way to do this. But basically, there's a peak of sand at the bottom, and as the sand falls from the top portion of it gets too heavy, so much that there's a collapse, and a bunch of the sand rushes down to one of the sides. When that happens, it's kind of dramatic. Because when you're watching an hourglass, it's very quiet, it's very simple, and not a whole lot changes as you're watching it. So in contrast to the very slow building up, the collapses are quite dramatic. And I actually really love that because oftentimes when we go through collapses, they feel just like that. And it's very therapeutic for me to watch an hourglass because I don't know, it just kind of slows things down for me, and then also helps me realize that these collapses are a big thing and they are real, and but they're also okay. And as time goes on, we can move on from them. So one thing I hope people take away from this hourglass analogy is that when a mound collapses, there is loss in height, and that loss in height is what we experience when we have it's the emotion behind that loss of height is kind of what explains the pain and the uncomfortableness and the discouragement that might come when we experience collapses in real life, right? It's because, if we're talking about building this hourglass or building this mound of sand, we're trying to reach a certain height. And when we have a collapse, we've lost some of that height. What is one thing I hope people can take away from this hourglass analogy is that that loss in height doesn't just go away. It gets converted into width and depth, and the wider base is what allows the mound of sand to build taller or higher than it could have before. So what that goes to say in this whole analogy is that when we go through those collapses, they are very painful, and they rightfully are very painful, and we should recognize them and be with each other when they happen. And hopefully, as you and the people in your life understand the language of the hourglass, then you can go to your partner or to your friend and say, hey, I just had this collapse. And right away they know that, okay, this person had a very difficult moment. Let me be there with them for that, and just support them, right? Yeah, some of my favorite conversations with people that I've had the opportunity to share this with has been emails back and forth, and we just reach out to each other and say, oh my gosh, I had this collapse the other day. It was really hard. And then the other person's like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. What can I do for you? How can I help? And And oftentimes just being there and listening with compassion is all that is needed, or all that can be done. Um, but it goes a long way. And it's so important for us to be able to have people in our lives to do that. So I hope that all of you can find people to do that. Um, let's see. Yeah, so that cycle just continues. And part of what I wanted to say in this book is that one, not only should we not fear collapses, but two, because they are normal and because they are necessary in reaching a certain height, or in other words, in order for an hourglass's mound of sand to build to a certain height, it will have had to have gone through several collapses before it got to that height. Like there literally physically is no way that a mound of sand can build up to a certain height without having collapsed along the way. So after I edited the video, I realized that I had forgotten to mention something very, very important. So although I believe that building and eventually the collapsing is all normal and is all very positive, well, it's not always normal and it's not always okay. So I just wanted to explain that there are certain exceptions to that. Sometimes collapses are not okay, and those are instances like abuse, social injustice, discrimination, and so forth. They aren't to be feared, but they're also something that we shouldn't be ashamed of. And this is something that I think, especially with people who are members of the church, but also just in general, right? We don't tend to talk about, we don't tend to like talking about our failures or our disappointments or our setbacks. Like I had an experience when I had applied to grad school and was really hopeful. I had a couple of interviews and didn't end up getting into any of them. And I had told a bunch of friends that I was waiting, I was on the wait list on some schools and so forth. But eventually, when I found out that I didn't get in, and my friends would ask me like, "Hey, did you hear what happened? Like, did you get into school?" Um, it was kind of embarrassing and kind of difficult to have to admit that like, you know what, I didn't get into any schools, and that's a very uncomfortable thing to have to admit to someone. But honestly, um, that experience of not getting into school allowed me to reevaluate things. I then volunteered and did a whole bunch of stuff to improve not just my application, but to improve who I am as a person. And, or in other words, I took that collapse and was able to build on it. And eventually I did get into grad school. So, um, sometimes things don't happen when we want them to. They don't happen according to the way we expected them to or hoped that they would. But I'm here to tell you that life overall is very good, and there's a lot of positivity that can be found even when times have been really tough and it seems like there are back-to-back collapses in all different areas of life, like relationships, faith, health, and so forth. um, that I'm here to tell you that life is good and that God loves you, and that you are resilient. You can get through it. Take the time to gather and do what is needed to help you gather, and then try to get back into building again. So the first step is the build phase, and basically, yeah, this is the stage that you're building. So it could be when you're learning something, it could be when you just start out something, um, and things feel great because most of the time when we're learning something new, even though there is lots to learn, learning tends to happen pretty quickly because you're just soaking in all of the information. Then we get to step 2, which, as I have written out on the side here, it's something that either you choose or it gets chosen for you. So sometimes you can wait at step 2 before you go on to step 3, but a lot of times in our lives, step 2 kind of happens without us wanting it to, or without it kind of just goes past step 2 without giving us a chance to have any say in it. Step 3 is the very painful step. It's where we realize things aren't quite as good as what we thought they were. Things didn't turn out the way we wanted. It could be times when we have setback or challenges. They can be very, very painful steps and moments in our lives, especially when they are in areas of our life that we care a lot about. So areas like the relationships we have with our loved ones. If we experience a collapse, it could have been a fight or some type of conflict in priorities or in different styles, like parenting styles or communication styles. Those can be very painful. But yeah, they are something that we shouldn't fear, because hopefully with this hourglass analogy, we'll learn that collapses, although they are momentary setbacks, they also are what allow us to build higher than we could have before. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. The last step is the gather step. This one is basically the time that it takes after a collapse before we're ready to start building again. So it's kind of the recharge and, well, yeah, the gather step, especially if we've had a really tough collapse, one that's been very painful or very dark or very difficult. It can take time to get through the gather step. And part of my analogy is wanting to say that it's okay if it takes time. So if, for example, if you had a collapse in your beliefs, sometimes it might feel like it's difficult to feel close to God again or to have the desire to go to church. And I think that's okay as long as we honestly are trying to gather and as long as we have the intent on returning to the build step to continue building our hourglass. So the gather step is one that people respond differently to, based on their personality. Some people like to back away, some people like to reach out. Whatever helps you to get back to building again, try to do that and give yourself some loving and compassionate space for yourself while you're in that gather step. That being said, in addition to loving yourself, which is absolutely essential for all of this entire process, the love and empathy of others can also go a long way. So please find people and fill your life with those people who are able to do that for you. That's my video for today. Thanks so much for watching. Originally, I wanted to go into my biggest collapse and the building that I've been able to do since then, but that would have made this video way too long. So I'm gonna be saving that for the next video, but thank you so much for watching this far. I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on the hourglass or about resilience or about any of the experiences that you've gone through that have helped you to become a stronger person. Yeah, thanks so much, and I hope you have a great day. See you.